Hello friends! Today we'll show you another adaptive shock absorber from a hypercar. This time, it's from the Lamborghini Huracán. Here's the part number. It's located somewhere around here, visible on the body. As expected from a hypercar, it uses a very special type of shock absorber. These are BWI magnetic ride dampers. Similar to what we've seen on the Lamborghini Aventador, these are Magneto Rheological. Here is the actual damper. So, what are magnetic dampers? We've featured them in other videos. Inside, the damper is filled with a special oil containing tiny metallic particles. When an electric current is sent through this cable, a magnetic field is generated inside the working piston. When this field is applied, the oil instantly thickens or becomes thinner, depending on the strength of the magnetic field. This allows the damper to go from very soft to very firm in a fraction of a second. So, what are the typical problems with these dampers? This type of damper tends to wear out quickly because the oil is abrasive. The oil gradually damages rubber or silicone seals, mixes with the gas, or causes failure of the main shaft seal located here in the guide, and that's when leaks begin. What happens then? The fluid phase leaks out, and what's left inside is mostly metallic sludge, which can't pass through the working piston, and the damper stops functioning properly. The damper is paired with a coil spring. And now something very interesting that we haven't shown before. This component is mounted directly onto the spring like this. The shock passes through this part. This section is pneumatic. It operates like a piston with air pressure. When pressed, it compresses or extends. Its function is to change the preload on the coil spring. It sits on top of the damper. As air is applied, it compresses the piston, presses the spring, and increases preload. It keeps the spring under tension. It's similar to what you'd see on motorcycles, where spring preload adjustment is also common. In the Huracán, this is done pneumatically, and in Lamborghini terminology, it's called the lift function. We haven't seen this exact system used on other similar dampers. Now we're going to test one of them. Both shock absorbers were sent to us. We'll test them on the dyno bench to show you the internal structure and what exactly is wrong. We're running a dynamometric test before starting the repair. You might even be able to hear what's going on inside. What do we see? The graph currently looks symmetrical. The damper is moving slowly and still functioning relatively well. The compression and rebound speeds increase. The graph becomes more distorted. You can also hear it knocking. This is due to two main reasons. First is gas-oil mixing. There's a gas chamber here, filled with nitrogen, separated by an O-ring. This O-ring seals against the shock tube to prevent gas from mixing with the oil. But since the oil is abrasive, the O-ring wears out quickly, and gas gets into the oil, creating foam. When the oil turns into foam, it loses its consistency and can't generate the proper damping force. Additionally, there is an oil leak here. You can see it clearly. The damper is leaking. We'll open it up and show you the internal parts.
Ще го отворим, за да ви покажем какво има.
how the oil behaves, and then demonstrate what the ideal damping graph should look like. And we'll also cover a few more interesting points.
Да обсъдим.
What does this graph show? For example, in this section of the stroke,
Примерно в ето този ход.
from about 15 to 20 mm of travel, we have 0 kg of damping force.
20 мм под 15 до 20 имаме.
In other words, the shock absorber has a brief dead zone before. It starts building maximum resistance. This dead zone is caused by the following. The oil, now in foam form, gets compressed by the piston instead of flowing through it. At first, it just compresses the foam. Then, as it thickens and reforms into liquid, only then can it begin to flow through the working piston. And that's when normal damping force is restored.
Празен ход е ужасен за поведението и за устойчивостта на колата и съответно се чува и като тропане.
Here we begin opening the damper and we'll show you the full internal breakdown.
И показваме поред. Това е тялото.
This is the damper body. As we mentioned, it's a single-tube monotube design. Here's how everything is arranged inside. This is the separator.
Ето е един сепаратор.
It sits right here, and this chamber is filled with gas.
Вътре е пълно с газ.
The separator is sealed by an O-ring. Here is the actual separator seal.
Сепараторното уплътнение.
It fits into this channel and seals against the inner wall of the cylinder.
Стената на цилиндъра. Когато се мести,
It moves like this and prevents nitrogen from mixing with the oil.
даването на азот в маслото.
This chamber here is filled with oil, and this is the working piston.
Това е работното бутало.
It moves inside the damper body and creates resistance.
Създава съпротивление.
Resistance is generated as the ferromagnetic oil flows through these holes.
Минава през
It enters here and exits through this passage.
и излиза през този отвор.
Then it returns through this port and exits again.
Излиза от тук.
That's what generates damping force. One of the major issues is this worn-out seal.
Това уплътнение.
I'm not sure if it's visible on camera, but my colleague will try to show where the damage is.
Или колегата може да ни покаже къде се е повредило. Оп, ето го на няколко места. То се
Here you can clearly see it's broken and damaged. When this seal fails, gas leaks into the oil and causes foaming. Another issue is with the guide. This is the damper guide,
Другият проблем е водачът. Това е
which sits like this and the shaft passes through it.
така. Минава през стеблото.
Inside it is the oil seal.
Или масленият семеринг.
When the oil seal wears out, the liquid part of the oil leaks out.
Част на маслото изтича. Видяхме
We saw this earlier on the dyno. The oil was leaking, and what's left inside is mostly sludge. Here's what remains inside, is slurry of oil and fine metallic dust.
от.
In a moment, we'll show you exactly how it behaves.
Ще ви го покажем след малко как работи.
We use silicone O-rings, which are much more resistant to wear and high temperatures. The temperature resistance is key.
Може да кажем температуроустойчиви, защото
Because these dampers operate across a wide range,
работи от минусовите
from sub-zero winter conditions to extreme summer heat,
доста високи температури през лятото.
especially when running under load, which causes additional heating. We also use an upgraded, serviceable guide design.
Който е разглобяем.
If you've seen our other videos, you've probably noticed this type of guide,
Сме ви показвали водачът,
which allows for replacement of the oil seal. The guide can be disassembled.
този водач може да се разглоби.
The seal changed and then reassembled. This makes it fully serviceable. Additionally, once reassembled,
Всичко отгоре, нали, след като се
it includes improved dust protection. That's this element here.
запита. Ето така.
Thanks to this dust cover, it's much more durable than the original guide
Оригиналния ще
and will last significantly longer after the damper is repaired by us.
нас.
What's important to know? For this type of damper to work properly, it's critical that the oil used in the repair is original and correct.
Отново да е оригинално.
Magneto Rheological oil is only available from the original supplier, Lord Corporation. This is the original fluid, and 1 liter of this oil is very expensive.
1 литър такова масло е доста скъпо.
It's important to mention that whenever handling this type of oil, you must wear gloves. The fine metallic particles are so small that they can potentially penetrate the skin.
Миниатюрни, че е възможно да преминат през кожата и
Enter the bloodstream and even reach the brain. One of the main issues with these
главните проблеми на тези
dampers is the oil itself. It's extremely abrasive. Let me show you something.
абразивно. Сега ще ви покажа нещо.
You can see how the metal particles have settled. That's the sludge layer, and above it is the remaining liquid oil.
Тайката, ето къде е.
This can even happen in
Това нещо се случва дори и в
shock absorbers from cars that have been sitting idle for years.
когато колата
Over time, the metallic particles settle at the bottom, and the damper stops functioning. It simply stops working. This is how the oil should look when properly
с
mixed.
стружки и масло, както си трябва. Защо ви го
Why am I showing you this? Because when the oil seal fails, the liquid oil you saw earlier leaks out,
течната част от
and only this metallic sludge remains inside.
него и вътре остава само тази кал. И когато
When that happens, the damper no longer functions correctly, and in some cases it becomes extremely stiff. That's because instead of oil passing through the piston holes,
минава кал. Тук сме сложили капка от маслото, за да видим
metallic mud
как реагира на магнитно поле, като отдолу сме сложили магнитче.
Here we have magnets, and this is a drop of the oil.
А това е капка от маслото. Колегата
My colleague will now show you what happens when we remove the magnetic field. This is without the magnet.
с магнит. Ето
Here's how the oil looks. Now I'll apply a magnetic field.
и дори може да
This is exactly how Magneto Rheological damping works. The moment an electric current is passed through the wire,
кабелчета се подаде електричество.
it activates an electromagnet,
Това тук е електромагнит.
creating a magnetic field that instantly thickens the oil, just like what you see here.
Се сгъстява както.
This allows the shock absorber
По този начин мигновенно амортисьора може
to
да
become
става
either
супер
super stiff or super soft instantly. The whole process is controlled by Lamborghini's onboard electronics, and that's why these dampers are extremely track-focused.
перформанс.
Now we'll replace everything that's worn out.
Сега ще сменим абсолютно всичко, което има.
Refill it with genuine Magneto Rheological oil,
Пълним отново с оригинално масло.
and put it on the test bench to show how a properly functioning Lamborghini shock We're now running a post-repair dyno test
Пускаме динамометричен тест след ремонта.
to demonstrate what the correct damping graph should look like. We'll also show how the damping force changes when adjusting the electric current, so you can see how the response adapts.
Даден към амортисьора. Ще видим как се променя и твърдостта му.
Right now, we've set the shock to its hardest setting so that the test
За да може
runs under maximum load conditions. Notice how perfectly symmetrical the graph is. At maximum load, the damper is generating about 260 kg of resistance in both compression and rebound. That's completely normal, because this is not a sedan,
това не е, този автомобил не е
but a much lighter sports car.
автомобил, който е доста по-лек.
We've now put the shock under load. In manual mode to observe
На ръчен режим и виждаме
how much resistance there is during compression and rebound. We cut off the current supply, and you can clearly see how much the damping force has changed, more than 10-12 times.
10-12.
Difference in stiffness. We can now fine-tune the damping by slightly adjusting the electric input. At the moment, I'm gradually increasing or decreasing the current.
Електрически ток. Или го намалявам.
Which directly affects the magnetic field by adjusting the voltage.
Променяйки напрежението.
Going through these wires, we control the magnetic field inside the shock. As a result, we also control the oil's viscosity, which means
гъстотата на маслото, при което имаме...
We get completely different damping behavior and resistance levels, and that's exactly how this system works.
Това е начинът, по който работи.
We're demonstrating that after our repair, the shock performs flawlessly, just like when it was brand new. And when you choose to repair such exotic dampers with us,
Екзотични амортисьори при нас.
you're making no compromises. Everything works perfectly as intended.
Идеално, функционално.
Finally, let us show you the Lamborghini's so-called lift function, which we mentioned at the beginning of the video, by supplying air here.
Като се подаде тук.
This piston gets pressurized and increases spring preload.
Увеличава напрежението на пружината.
So when the vehicle is loaded and the shock compresses and the spring collapses, this piston pushes upward to level the ride height,
Това бутало помпайки изравнява,
essentially raising the car and compensating for sag.
компенсира това, което е клекнало.
Now my colleague will push on it. Watch this. The spring compresses just like that. And that's the so-called lift function on this supercar. Goodbye and see you next time.
Този спортен автомобил.